September 12, 1944. The relentless Pacific sun had already begun its scorching assault by 0800 hours as Major Robert Cowboy Stout expertly maneuvered himself into the confined cockpit of his F-6F Hellcat, stationed meticulously aboard the formidable USS Hornet. The expansive flight deck presented a scene of meticulously orchestrated pandemonium. Ground crews, easily identifiable by their vibrantly color-coded jerseys, darted with practiced urgency amongst the formidable warbirds, the pungent, metallic scent of high-octane aviation fuel mingling with the briny tang of the sea air, all underscored by the ceaseless, thunderous roar of powerful engines being coaxed to optimal operating temperatures for the day's impending aerial sorties. Stout, a veteran aviator, had already accumulated an impressive tally of 63 perilous combat missions by this pivotal juncture, yet an inexplicable premonition, a subtle shift in the atmospheric pressure of the morning, suggested a departure from the routine. The intelligence briefings convened the preceding evening had been conspicuously vague, even bordering on dismissive in their presentation. The designated objective was Peleliu, an inconsequential speck of coral and dense jungle situated within the remote Palau Islands, a geographical entity largely unknown and unremarked upon by the vast majority of American citizens. In a mere 3 days, a formidable contingent of 15,000 Marines was slated to execute an amphibious assault upon those very beaches, an operation which commanding officers had confidently, and erroneously, assured would culminate in a swift, decisive 3-day victory. A sobering historical postscript reveals a grim reality. The campaign would tragically protract for 2 arduous months, exacting a devastating toll of nearly 10,000 casualties. However, the full, harrowing scope of this impending catastrophe remained, mercifully, beyond Stout's immediate comprehension. His assigned mission, at least on paper, appeared deceptively straightforward: conduct a reconnaissance flight over the northern airfields, meticulously capture a series of photographic images, and subsequently transmit a comprehensive report back to headquarters. The senior command urgently required definitive confirmation that Japanese aerial capabilities within this specific region were, in fact, negligible. Prior reconnaissance sorties had consistently reported these airfields as either completely deserted or, at best, only minimally defended. Stout's task, therefore, amounted to little more than a perfunctory verification, an essential bureaucratic checkbox to be ticked before the full-scale invasion commenced its inexorable momentum. He had executed scores of such milk runs previously, missions characterized by their inherent tedium and predictable routine, the kind of assignment where the most significant peril was the risk of succumbing to slumber at the controls during the protracted return flight. This particular instance, however, would prove to be an egregious exception, for the intelligence assessment was catastrophically erroneous. As Stout's F-6F Hellcat meticulously approached Peleliu from its eastern flank, maintaining a precise altitude of 8,000 feet, he initiated his standard photographic reconnaissance protocol. The specialized camera, securely affixed directly behind his cockpit, was designed to autonomously capture a series of overlapping images as he maintained a perfectly straight and level trajectory over the designated target area. It was at this precise moment that his gaze apprehended a spectacle that simultaneously chilled his very marrow and, in the same electrifying instant, propelled his sophisticated tactical intellect into an accelerated state of hypervigilance. The airfield, far from being abandoned, was teeming with activity. Serried ranks of Japanese aircraft were meticulously arranged, wingtip to wingtip, upon the tarmac, presenting a dense, almost sardine-like configuration. The sleek Mitsubishi A6M0s, those notoriously nimble and highly effective fighters. that had so decisively dominated the initial phases of the war. The formidable Nakajima B-5 and torpedo bombers, and the robust Ichid-3A dive bombers, all meticulously fueled, comprehensively armed, and poised with ominous readiness to unleash their destructive potential upon the unsuspecting invasion fleet that was, at that very moment, steaming relentlessly toward Peleliu. Stout's experienced gaze rapidly tallied the visible aircraft. His extensive combat background allowed him to swiftly and accurately estimate the density of the aerial contingent, a minimum of 40 planes, and quite possibly more, ingeniously concealed beneath expertly draped camouflage netting near the verdant jungle's periphery. This was unequivocally not a token defensive contingent. This represented a substantial strike group, meticulously positioned and evidently primed to launch a devastating, preemptive assault upon the American naval vessels just beyond the horizon. Should these aircraft successfully achieve airborne status during the critical invasion period, they would undoubtedly inflict catastrophic damage upon the highly vulnerable transport ships laden with thousands of Marines. Such a scenario would inevitably result in the tragic loss of countless lives in the unforgiving ocean waters before a single soldier could even set foot upon the designated beaches. The entire meticulously planned operation faced the very real prospect of disintegrating into an unimaginable bloodbath, a carnage that would render the infamous Battle of Tarawa seem, by comparison, little more than a mere training exercise. His radio receiver crackled intermittently with the routine, unhurried check-ins from other pilots operating within the vicinity, their voices maintaining a tone of professional calm and composed efficiency. Stout's thumb hesitated, hovering momentarily over the transmit button. Established military protocol unequivocally mandated that he report this critical development without delay, immediately disengage from the area, and allow the fleet to dispatch a properly constituted and coordinated strike package. However, he instinctively understood the dire implications of such a course of action. By the time he could execute a return flight, meticulously file a comprehensive report, and subsequently persuade skeptical intelligence officers that they had overlooked an entire, fully operational air base, precious, irrecoverable hours would have elapsed. During this crucial delay, the Japanese forces would undoubtedly disperse these aircraft, conceal them within fortified revetments, or, far more catastrophically, launch them in a devastating attack against the unsuspecting American fleet. At this precise moment, however, these enemy aircraft presented an unparalleled opportunity, sitting exposed and vulnerable, almost certainly awaiting dawn reconnaissance reports to confirm the precise location of the invasion fleet before initiating their own devastating counterattack. Stout executed another meticulous pass, this time deliberately descending to an altitude of 3,000 feet to obtain a more granular and comprehensive visual assessment. His keen photographer's eye assiduously catalogued every discernible detail, even as his deeply ingrained fighter pilot instinct screamed urgent warnings regarding the probable locations of concealed anti-aircraft positions. The airfield itself stretched expansively along Peleliu's northern coastline, featuring a solitary, meticulously carved runway fashioned from the indigenous coral and dense jungle terrain, with expansive dispersal areas fanning out symmetrically on both flanks. What particularly arrested his attention was not merely the sheer quantity of aircraft, but rather the highly unconventional and dangerously exposed manner in which they were arrayed. Someone on the ground, likely compelled by the intense urgency of preparing for their own impending strike mission, had made a fatal miscalculation. The planes were parked in astonishingly tight, almost parade ground neat rows, with a perilous proximity of barely 15 feet separating each individual aircraft. Standard tactical procedure would have dictated their wide dispersal, strategic concealment beneath the natural canopy of trees, and robust protection within fortified revetments. Instead, they presented an almost surreal tableau, as if meticulously lined up for a pre-flight inspection on a peacetime flight school parade ground. Through the transparent expanse of his canopy, Stout clearly observed ground crews busily engaged amongst the aircraft. These diminutive figures, clad in their distinctive khaki uniforms, were actively engaged in rolling fuel drums, meticulously transporting ammunition belts, and performing crucial pre-flight checks. They remained utterly oblivious to the solitary American fighter circling menacingly above them. And why would they suspect otherwise? Japanese early warning radar systems within this specific sector were, at best, rudimentary, and the occasional presence of single aircraft reconnaissance flights was sufficiently commonplace that such sightings rarely triggered a full-scale alert. The pervasive sense of complacency was almost palpable, even from his vantage point at 3,000 feet. These enemy crews evidently believed they held unchallenged dominion over the skies this particular morning. They harbored the misguided conviction that they had abundant time at their disposal. Stout's sophisticated tactical analysis was now operating at its absolute zenith. He had undergone rigorous training in ground attack methodologies at Pensacola, dedicating countless weeks to perfecting strafing runs against stationary target sleds and the inert hulks of painted trucks. The established doctrine was unequivocally straightforward: execute a low-altitude, high-speed approach, strike the designated target with a singular, devastating pass, and then rapidly disengage before enemy ground fire could effectively track and engage the aircraft. However, this established doctrine implicitly assumed an engagement scenario involving one or, at most, a couple of targets, not an entire, fully operational air base. His F-6F Hellcat was formidable, armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns meticulously integrated into its wings, 3 powerful weapons per side, each gun meticulously loaded with 400 rounds of ammunition. This configuration provided him with an impressive total of 2,400 rounds. Considering the Browning M2's formidable cyclic rate of 750 rounds per minute, he could realistically sustain approximately 12 seconds of continuous, concentrated fire before completely depleting his ammunition reserves. 12 precious seconds to utterly neutralize 40 enemy aircraft. The mathematical equation, in any conventional interpretation, simply did not compute. Yet, the more Stout meticulously scrutinized the layout of the airfield, the more he became acutely aware that conventional strategic thinking held no applicability in this extraordinary circumstance. Those enemy aircraft were not merely parked in dangerously close proximity. They were, with astonishing negligence, positioned directly adjacent to their vital fuel supplies. He could distinctly discern the stacks of fuel drums positioned beside each plane, undoubtedly containing high-octane aviation gasoline, awaiting transfer into the aircraft's tanks for the impending morning strike. A single, well-placed tracer round impacting one of these fuel drums would instantaneously transform it into a volatile incendiary device. One aircraft consumed by flames would inevitably propagate the conflagration to its adjacent counterparts. The Japanese, through a catastrophic oversight, had inadvertently engineered a colossal, self-perpetuating chain reaction, primed and waiting to ignite. This operation was not destined to be a protracted endeavor of individually engaging and destroying 40 separate aircraft. This was an unprecedented opportunity to ignite a singular, devastating fuse and allow the inexorable forces of thermodynamics to accomplish the remainder of the destructive work. He meticulously verified his fuel gauge. A sufficient quantity remained for the execution of the strike mission and the subsequent return flight, with a prudent reserve still available. His ammunition counter confirmed full loads across all 6 formidable guns. The Hellcat felt unequivocally solid beneath him, exhibiting a profound responsiveness, poised and ready for the impending engagement. This particular aircraft had steadfastly carried him through 63 previous missions. He trusted its capabilities, with the same unwavering faith one might place in a loyal and dependable steed. Yet, even profound trust could not entirely eliminate the inherent, omnipresent risk. Down below, somewhere within the dense, verdant jungle encircling that exposed airfield, Japanese anti-aircraft positions lay in wait. Type 96 25mm autocannons, almost certainly the standard light anti-aircraft weapon within the Japanese arsenal, would be meticulously scanning the expansive sky, their operators' fingers poised tensely on their triggers. The instant he initiated his first attack pass, the moment those powerful machine guns began their thunderous roar, every concealed gun position on that island would instantly erupt, unleashing a torrent of retaliatory fire. He would be utterly alone, completely unsupported, deliberately flying into a tempest of lethal steel, devoid of a wingman to provide crucial cover, and with no prospect of rescue should his aircraft be brought down. The critical decision point crystallized in Stout's mind with an almost blinding clarity. Every precious second he continued to circle above was another second those enemy aircraft remained poised, capable of inflicting mass casualties upon American sailors and Marines. He possessed the option to radio back to the carrier, dutifully await explicit orders, and observe as a properly constituted and coordinated strike package was meticulously organized, a full complement of combat air patrol, CAP fighters, precision dive bombers, the entire synchronized ballet of naval aviation. Such a process would consume a minimum of 90 minutes, and more realistically, closer to 2 hours, factoring in comprehensive briefings and the intricate launch sequences. By that time, Japanese spotters would almost certainly have reported the precise location of the invasion fleet. Those 40 enemy aircraft would then be airborne, widely dispersed, and actively hunting. The fleeting window of this unparalleled opportunity would then irrevocably slam shut. Military doctrine existed for profoundly valid reasons. Meticulous coordination undeniably saved lives. The application of overwhelming force demonstrably minimized risk. Thorough and comprehensive planning demonstrably prevented catastrophic disasters. Stout had diligently attended every lecture at flight school, meticulously absorbing every lesson about the absolute imperative of never engaging the enemy without robust support. However, doctrine, by its very nature, could not possibly account for every conceivable situation. Occasionally, the brutal realities of war presented an individual with a moment that transcended the established rulebook, a unique convergence of circumstances that would never, under any other conditions, repeat itself. This, unequivocally, was that moment. 40 enemy aircraft packed together with the explosive density of ammunition in a magazine, utterly vulnerable, and possessing the inherent capability to fundamentally alter the entire trajectory of the Polilu invasion if permitted to remain intact. And facing this unprecedented opportunity stood one solitary American pilot, equipped with a fully armed Hellcat and the exceptional skill to wield it. The rational, analytical segment of Stout's brain meticulously catalogued every conceivable pathway through which this audacious plan could go catastrophically awry. Intense anti-aircraft fire could utterly shred his Hellcat on the very first pass, sending him cartwheeling uncontrollably into the dense jungle below in a searing ball of flame. A single, fortuitous enemy shot could sever his vital hydraulic lines, rendering him utterly incapable of controlling the aircraft. His machine guns could jam, a not uncommon occurrence even with the notoriously reliable Brownings, particularly within the oppressive humidity of the Pacific theater. He could tragically misjudge his altitude during the critical attack run, and plowed directly into the unforgiving ground at a horrifying speed of 300 miles per hour. Any of these dire outcomes signified dying alone on a desolate, nameless island, his body never to be recovered, his grieving family destined to receive a terse telegram bearing the antiseptic, soul-numbing phrase, "Missing in action, presumed dead." Yet, the opposing side of that perilous equation presented an equally stark and undeniable clarity. The tactical imperative confronting him was undeniably stark. Should those Japanese aircraft successfully commence their offensive, the American transport fleet would undoubtedly suffer catastrophic losses, engulfed in flames. These lumbering, susceptible vessels, laden with United States Marines and their vital material, were destined to transform into fiery mausoleums when assailed by the formidable combination of torpedo and dive bombers. Pilot Stout possessed first-hand knowledge, having observed harrowing combat footage from preceding amphibious assaults, depicting naval vessels erupting into fiery wrecks and submerging rapidly, often with scores of personnel entombed within their confines. Furthermore, he had absorbed the anguished radio transmissions from fellow aviators who arrived belatedly to interdict such assaults, the raw desperation palpable in their vocalizations as they helplessly witnessed ships succumbing to the depths. Such a tragedy was utterly unacceptable in this crucial theater of operations, especially not when he possessed the decisive capability to avert such a calamity, and certainly not with a formidable contingent of 40 hostile aircraft arrayed below, presenting an almost irresistible array of targets, akin to those found on a meticulously prepared firing range. Beyond the immediate existential threat, an additional, less tangible but utterly compelling factor presented itself: the sheer, unadulterated tactical advantage inherent in the unfolding situation. Across his extensive record of 63 arduous combat sorties, Stout had never before witnessed an aggregation of enemy aerial assets so impeccably arrayed for wholesale obliteration. The prevailing reality of aerial engagements in the vast Pacific theater typically comprised grueling, high-altitude dogfights, characterized by rapid fuel consumption, the arduous pursuit of agile, evasive Zero fighters amidst cloud formations, or frontal assaults on heavily fortified enemy installations yielding often negligible outcomes. The present circumstance, however, diverged dramatically from this established pattern. It represented the quintessential fantasy of every fighter pilot, the sort of unparalleled chance that aviators recounted with bravado in the confines of ready rooms, yet seldom, if ever, genuinely encountered in the brutal theater of war. The Imperial Japanese forces had committed a profound miscalculation, a grievous operational blunder, and the very essence of warfare dictated the swift and decisive exploitation of such enemy errors before any possibility of rectification could materialize. Without hesitation, Stout's gloved hand instinctively advanced the throttle lever, propelling it decisively forward. Immediately, the formidable Pratt & Whitney engine of his F-6F Hellcat responded with a visceral, deep-throated bellow, its 18 powerful cylinders collectively unleashing a formidable 2,000 horsepower. With a practiced motion, he expertly dipped the aircraft's nose, initiating a rapid, steep descent towards the enemy airfield. Further radio communication ceased, as did any lingering thought of extended reconnaissance passes. The critical choice had been irrevocably cast. Within a mere 30 seconds, his destiny would be sealed, his name either immortalized in the annals of heroism or relegated to a grim numerical entry in casualty reports. Regardless of his personal outcome, one absolute certainty remained: those Japanese aircraft would not launch their intended assault upon the vulnerable invasion fleet. He was utterly resolved to ensure this outcome, prepared to either succeed in his audacious endeavor or perish in the attempt. The F-6F Hellcat plummeted with the predatory swiftness of a hawk plunging towards its unsuspecting quarry. Stout observed his altimeter's needle rapidly unwinding, indicating a swift descent past 2,000 feet, then 1,500 feet. He deftly leveled the powerful fighter at an astonishingly low altitude of merely 50 feet above the dense jungle canopy, so close that the turbulent prop wash from his aircraft visibly thrashed the surrounding palm fronds. Operating at such an extreme low level, he effectively circumvented the majority of enemy radar detection systems and positioned himself squarely within the operational envelope where ground-based anti-aircraft crews found it exceedingly challenging to accurately track and engage a rapidly moving aerial target. The Japanese airfield surged into his view, closing rapidly, granting him a scant window of perhaps 3 critical seconds to finalize his intricate attack geometry. The numerous rows of Imperial Japanese aircraft were meticulously aligned on a northeast to southwest axis, positioned uniformly parallel to the main runway. Stout's strategic design for his attack involved an approach path perpendicular to these orderly rows, a maneuver calculated to allow him to traverse multiple lines of parked aircraft during a singular, devastating pass, rather than simply following a single row longitudinally. This innovative tactic ensured a significantly greater number of targets within his concentrated cone of fire, thereby dramatically enhancing the probability of igniting the catastrophic chain reaction he so desperately sought. His airspeed indicator registered a blistering 310 miles per hour as he dramatically cleared the final dense barrier of jungle foliage. The enemy airfield unfurled before him, presenting itself with the stark simplicity and target-rich environment of a meticulously arranged shooting gallery. With astonishing suddenness, discrete details became terrifyingly clear, ground crew personnel glancing upwards in bewildered confusion, their expressions momentarily discernible before dawning recognition swiftly transformed into unadulterated panic. Sturdy fuel drums stacked in precarious triple-high formations adjacent to each aircraft, and even a Mitsubishi Zero, its engine cowling peeled back, indicating that ongoing maintenance operations were still underway. Without conscious thought, Stout's thumb instinctively located the prominent firing button positioned on his control stick. The formidable armament of 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns was meticulously synchronized to converge their deadly streams of projectiles at a precise point 300 yards ahead, thereby generating an exceptionally destructive cone of fire capable of obliterating anything caught within its lethal trajectory. Each individual machine gun unleashed a lethal concoction of armor-piercing incendiary rounds intermingled with conventional ball ammunition, a potent blend specifically engineered to breach the robust skin of enemy aircraft and subsequently ignite their volatile fuel systems. With unwavering resolve, he depressed the firing button. The entire Hellcat airframe vibrated violently as all 6 formidable guns commenced firing in a synchronized, thunderous volley, producing a sound akin to the cataclysmic rending of canvas amplified 1,000-fold, deafening in its intensity. From beneath his wings, brilliant streams of tracer rounds arced outwards, illuminating the path of destruction, with every 5th projectile glowing an incandescent red, providing pilots with a crucial visual reference to walk their devastating fire precisely onto the intended target. Stout meticulously directed his torrent of fire towards the inaugural row of parked aircraft, his sights specifically zeroing in on the narrow interstitial space between 2 Mitsubishi Zeros, where he distinctly observed a dangerous cluster of fuel drums. The heavy .50 caliber projectiles sighed across the pristine coral tarmac, sending up plumes of white dust, before inexorably stitching their way into the delicate fuselage of the first Zero. Under this relentless, furious onslaught, the aircraft's metallic skin peeled away with the fragile ease of mere tissue paper. He maintained continuous pressure on the trigger for a duration of 2 complete seconds, discharging approximately 25 rounds from each gun, culminating in a devastating total of 150 projectiles, before subtly adjusting his line of fire a fraction to the left. The tightly packed fuel drums did not detonate in a singular, instantaneous explosion, but rather erupted in a spectacular, cascading sequence, appearing almost deliberately choreographed in its destructive progression. The initial drum detonated with a violent eruption, sending an incandescent orange fireball billowing skyward, which instantaneously engulfed its adjacent counterparts. High-octane aviation gasoline, a volatile and potent fuel, does not merely combust. Rather, when atomized and ignited, it undergoes a rapid detonation, generating powerful overpressure waves that swiftly propagate through the expansive vapor cloud. This initial explosion catastrophically ignited the Zero's wing tank, a reservoir that had almost certainly been fully replenished in preparation for the morning's anticipated offensive strike. The Japanese fighter vanished entirely amidst a ferocious secondary blast, an inferno that propelled scorching, burning fuel outwards, drenching and igniting 2 immediately adjacent aircraft. Stout's Hellcat, traveling at immense speed, had already surged beyond the initial inferno, his incandescent tracers now inexorably finding their mark on the subsequent row of enemy aircraft, relentlessly hammering into the distended fuselage of a Nakajima torpedo bomber. This particular aircraft, a significantly larger and heavier warplane, was undoubtedly crammed to capacity with vast quantities of aviation fuel, intended for its crucial long-range offensive sorties against Allied shipping. When this formidable bomber detonated, the resulting explosion generated a concussive blast of such immense power that Stout distinctly felt the shockwave violently buffet his robust Hellcat, even as he hurtled past the epicenter at a blistering 300 miles per hour. In his wake, a horrifying spectacle unfolded as the conflagration rapidly intensified, spreading with terrifying, unchecked velocity. The Imperial Japanese forces had committed a critical error by parking their aircraft in such close proximity that the torrents of burning fuel from one destroyed machine inevitably flowed beneath and ignited its immediate neighbors. The structural aluminum of aircraft begins to melt at a temperature of 1,220 degrees Fahrenheit. Aviation gasoline, however, combusts at an infernal 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Consequently, wing tanks, unable to withstand the intense thermal stress, were rupturing spontaneously even prior to direct contact with flames, instantaneously disgorging hundreds of gallons of highly volatile fuel that ignited in a blinding flash. Across the rapidly deteriorating airfield, ground crew personnel scattered in utter disarray, frantically scrambling in every conceivable direction. A desperate few attempted to access rudimentary firefighting apparatus, while the overwhelming majority simply fled in sheer terror for their very lives. The camouflaged anti-aircraft emplacements, belatedly roused to action, were commencing their defensive reactions. Sporadic muzzle flashes winked into existence from concealed positions strategically located near the runway, yet their defensive fire was largely uncoordinated and blind, their gunners desperately tracking the billowing smoke and general pandemonium rather than the actual Hellcat, which had already hurtled far beyond their effective fields of fire. Stout, maintaining his relentless assault, kept his finger firmly depressed on the trigger, continuously hosing a devastating torrent of rounds across the third and fourth successive rows of meticulously parked enemy aircraft. A lengthy formation of Aichi dive bombers bore the brunt of his concentrated fire, their relatively thin aluminum skins offering absolutely no meaningful protection whatsoever against the destructive force of the .50 caliber armor-piercing projectiles. Crucially, one of these particular dive bombers still carried its lethal ordnance. He caught a fleeting glimpse of the bombs, conspicuously slung beneath the aircraft's wings, in the infinitesimal fraction of a second preceding the moment his searing tracers inevitably found their explosive targets. The ensuing explosion proved nothing short of utterly catastrophic in its destructive magnitude. A colossal detonation ripped through the air, propelling a towering, ominous mushroom cloud of dense black smoke skyward, boiling violently into the atmosphere. Lethal shrapnel, propelled with immense force from the epicenter of the blast, mercilessly shredded two immediately adjacent Zero fighters, rendering these once pristine warboots into grotesquely twisted metal sculptures in the blink of an eye, as if struck by a titanic shotgun discharge. The concussive shockwave generated was of such considerable force that a shower of debris audibly pattered against Stout's cockpit canopy, with numerous small fragments of ruptured aircraft material pinging sharply off the reinforced glass. Before his very eyes, the entirety of the enemy airfield was rapidly and horrifyingly transforming into a veritable hell on earth. What had commenced as a series of meticulously aimed, surgical strikes targeting vulnerable fuel drums had rapidly and horrifyingly escalated into an utterly uncontrolled and all-consuming conflagration. The ferocious flames were now leaping with terrifying agility from one aircraft to another, relentlessly spreading through expanding pools of incandescent gasoline that coursed across the coral tarmac, inexorably following the subtle downward grade of the main runway. A rapid succession of secondary explosions punctuated the roar of the inferno, occurring every few agonizing seconds as various types of ammunition cooked off spontaneously within the burning aircraft, from the smaller machine gun rounds intended for the fighters to the more substantial 20mm cannon shells, and even some of the relatively smaller bombs that had not yet been fully armed or loaded onto their racks. Every subsequent explosion served only to exacerbate the pervasive chaos, generating an ever-increasing deluge of lethal shrapnel, igniting new pockets of fire, and accelerating the overall trajectory of destruction. The smoke, now voluminous and dense, ascended into the sky in towering, thick black columns, a grim testament to the devastation of a magnitude that would be unmistakably discernible from the distant Allied carrier task force, positioned some 50 miles offshore. Numerous ground crew personnel, many of whom had been actively engaged in routine maintenance just moments prior, found themselves tragically ensnared between the expanding wall of burning aircraft and the dense, unforgiving jungle perimeter. As he thundered past, Stout's peripheral vision registered fleeting, harrowing glimpses of their desperate plight, figures frantically diving for cover into narrow drainage ditches, while others, in acts of desperate futility, flailed at the encroaching flames with their jackets, attempting to salvage aircraft that were, by all rational assessment, already irrevocably doomed. A large fuel truck, which had been actively servicing the bombers, absorbed a direct burst of his concentrated fire, detonating with sufficient explosive force to violently flip it onto its side, its substantial cargo of high-octane aviation fuel instantly contributing an additional 1,000 gallons to the already raging, insatiable inferno. The pervasive heat emanating from the burgeoning inferno was now so profoundly intense that Stout could distinctly perceive its radiant energy within the confines of his cockpit, even as he maintained a blistering speed of 300 miles per hour. This palpable wave of thermal energy caused the very air ahead to visibly shimmer and significantly distorted his visual perception of the remaining targets. His onboard ammunition counters were rapidly depleting, their numerical displays diminishing with alarming speed. He estimated that he had expended approximately half of his total ammunition load during that singular, devastating initial pass, accounting for perhaps 1,200 rounds discharged across all 6 formidable guns. Crucially, however, the scale of destruction unfolding below was exponentially multiplying, far surpassing anything he could have possibly accomplished through the direct impact of gunfire alone. The Imperial Japanese forces had unwittingly engineered a perfect storm of critical vulnerabilities: highly concentrated fuel supplies, aircraft parked in dangerously close proximity, severely inadequate fire suppression equipment, and, most likely, negligible training for their ground crews on how to effectively manage a catastrophe of this unparalleled magnitude. In a cascading series of unfortunate events, virtually every conceivable element was now going catastrophically wrong for the enemy, and Stout, in his audacious strike, had been the singular, decisive catalyst that had inexorably set this entire chain of devastating reactions into motion. At the precise extremity of the devastated airfield, he executed a sharp, decisive pull-up, rapidly ascending to an altitude of 500 feet, a strategic maneuver designed to afford him a comprehensive overview of the unfolding damage and to allow for immediate planning of his subsequent tactical actions. The intensity of the enemy's anti-aircraft fire was now noticeably escalating. Ominous black puffs of 25mm shells began to burst with alarming proximity around his aircraft, indicating that the enemy gunners, despite their initial confusion, were finally acquiring a more accurate range. Bright, menacing tracers from numerous light machine gun emplacements arced upwards from multiple ground positions, collectively weaving a dangerous, incandescent web of fire through which he was compelled to skillfully navigate. The Imperial Japanese defenders were clearly succumbing to widespread panic, discharging their weapons indiscriminately at virtually anything that moved, yet their accuracy remained woefully abysmal. The combined psychological impact of sheer terror and the suffocating, pervasive smoke from the inferno were irrevocably compromising their ability to aim effectively. After executing a sharp right bank, Lieutenant Stout shrewdly leveraged his superior altitude, ensuring he remained beyond the most intense concentrations of enemy ground fire. This tactical pause allowed him a crucial moment to comprehensively assess the extensive damage he had already inflicted. The entire northern sector of the enemy airfield lay utterly consumed by a raging conflagration. A minimum of 15 Japanese aircraft were either actively ablaze or had already succumbed to the inferno, their sleek forms reduced to charred, skeletal husks of their previous operational capacity. However, his initial devastating sweep had left the southern portion of the airfield largely untouched, still presenting a multitude of viable targets. His keen eye swiftly tallied an additional 20 to 25 aircraft that had escaped his first destructive pass. Some of these remaining planes were already being frantically maneuvered by desperate ground personnel, who were attempting to taxi them away from the encroaching flames. This hurried evacuation, while seemingly logical, was ironically a grave tactical error, as it transformed static, easily targeted assets into mobile, albeit still highly susceptible targets. A subtle, satisfied grin spread across Stout's face, hidden beneath the confines of his oxygen mask. Their desperate actions, in fact, were inadvertently simplifying his formidable mission. With resolute determination, he nudged the control stick forward, meticulously aligning his aircraft for the impending second assault. This subsequent pass, Stout understood with absolute clarity, would unfold under vastly altered and considerably more perilous conditions. The critical advantage of surprise, which had so effectively characterized his initial, devastating strike, had completely evaporated. It was now supplanted by a fully awakened and acutely aware adversary, one that had just witnessed the first aerial onslaught transform their vital airfield into a fiery crematorium. Consequently, every anti-aircraft emplacement across the entire island of Peleliu was now actively engaged in tracking his Hellcat's trajectory, with gun crews frantically manipulating elevation wheels and meticulously calculating lead on his projected flight path. Furthermore, The pervasive and voluminous smoke represented another significant impediment. Colossal, inky columns billowed thousands of feet skyward, effectively cloaking potential targets and generating severe atmospheric turbulence that rendered any semblance of precise, controlled flight an almost insurmountable challenge. Nonetheless, the surviving aircraft positioned within the southern dispersal zone constituted an equally formidable menace as those already consumed by the raging inferno. Leaving them operational was simply not an option for Stout. Consequently, he opted for a markedly different approach vector on this occasion, commencing his attack from the southeast rather than replicating the exact trajectory of his initial, successful strafing run. This deviation was a cornerstone of fundamental survival doctrine in aerial combat. One must never replicate an attack pattern, as enemy gunners swiftly learn to predict and preempt an aircraft's flight path. His airspeed for this second pass was deliberately reduced, hovering around 280 miles per hour, a modification that afforded him significantly enhanced target resolution and precision. However, this diminished velocity concurrently rendered him considerably more susceptible to the concentrated barrage of ground fire. This calculated compromise, Stout recognized, was absolutely indispensable. At his previous speed of 310 miles per hour, the ground targets had appeared as indistinct blurs, making accurate engagement challenging. The adjusted 280 miles per hour, conversely, permitted him to meticulously identify and select individual targets, ensuring that every precious, dwindling round of ammunition would be maximally effective. Indeed, his ordnance supply had reached a precarious juncture. He estimated approximately 800 rounds remained distributed among all 6 of his machine guns, a meager quantity that translated to a mere 6 seconds of continuous firing capability. The relentless anti-aircraft barrage erupted around him, manifesting as a terrifying yet mesmerizing spectacle, a veritable light show of impending doom. Brilliant streams of tracer rounds intricately crisscrossed his perilous flight path, some passing with such alarming proximity that he could distinctly discern the incandescent projectiles hurtling past the protective confines of his canopy. A particularly vicious 25mm shell detonated with a concussive force merely 30 feet to his port side, its explosive fragmentation rattling audibly against the sturdy metal of his fuselage. Moments later, another deadly burst materialized directly in his forward view, compelling him to execute an immediate, sharp jink to the right, a defensive maneuver that regrettably compromised his targeting aim for a critical, fleeting second. It was increasingly evident that the Japanese gunners were rapidly honing their skills, precisely calibrating their fire to his evolving speed and altitude, strategically creating lethal kill boxes through which he was relentlessly forced to navigate. In these harrowing moments, Stout's rigorous combat training instinctively assumed control, dictating his every move, the fundamental dictum to never maintain a straight and level flight path for more than 2 consecutive seconds, and to perpetually vary his altitude, heading, or airspeed, thereby rendering himself an utterly unpredictable and exceedingly difficult target for the enemy to acquire and engage. With unwavering focus, Stout initiated his attack on a cluster of 5 Japanese Zero fighters, which ground crews were frantically attempting to taxi towards the protective cover of the adjacent jungle. His precise streams of tracer ammunition swiftly located the lead aircraft, savagely raking its fuselage from the spinning propeller to the very tip of its tail. The Zero's fuel tank instantaneously ruptured in a violent explosion, and within moments, its pilot was observed desperately scrambling from the inferno of the burning cockpit, his flight suit already engulfed in flames. The stricken aircraft then inexorably rolled to a complete stop, transforming into yet another blazing pyre on the embattled airfield. Adjusting his trajectory with practiced ease, Stout then targeted and intercepted the second Zero as it endeavored to swerve away, unleashing a torrent of rounds directly into its engine cowling. A visible plume of white coolant erupted into the air, the engine abruptly seized, and the fighter violently shuddered before grinding to a definitive halt. A further series of 3 concentrated bursts effectively incapacitated 2 additional fighters within the beleaguered group. The 5th and final Zero managed to reach the relative sanctuary of the Trilene before a remarkably fortuitous shot from Stout's rapidly dwindling ammunition supply punctured a critical component, causing it to nosedive precipitously into the dense jungle foliage, thereby rendering it irretrievably out of commission, even if not utterly consumed by fire. A distinct, metallic click resonated through the cockpit, signaling that his portside guns had completely expended their ammunition. Indeed, the 3 formidable Browning machine guns mounted in his left wing had abruptly ceased firing, their magazines utterly depleted. While he still retained the operational capacity of his starboard guns, with an estimated 300 rounds remaining, this sudden asymmetry in firepower presented a considerable challenge to precise aiming. The Hellcat, now experiencing an unbalanced recoil, exhibited a strong tendency to pull sharply to the left. Stout expertly counteracted this torque, applying judicious rudder pressure as he relentlessly scanned for further targets. His gaze soon fixed upon a pair of enemy dive bombers, idly positioned near a cleverly camouflaged revetment, likely in the process of being armed and prepared for an imminent strike mission. He meticulously walked his diminishing stream of tracer rounds across both aircraft, systematically puncturing their cockpits and rupturing their vulnerable fuel cells. One of the bombers ignited instantaneously, erupting into a furious blaze. The second aircraft, meanwhile, remained stationary, steadily leaking aviation fuel onto the tarmac, until the rapidly spreading conflagration from its burning companion reached the accumulating puddle, at which point both aircraft spectacularly detonated in a deeply satisfying, synchronized double explosion. Suddenly, a violent impact jolted the Hellcat. An unseen projectile had slammed into its tail section with formidable force. The solid blow caused the entire aircraft to shudder violently, a visceral testament to the direct hit. Stout's gaze instinctively darted across his instrument panel, his eyes meticulously scanning for any ominous red warning lights or telltale plummeting gauge needles. To his relief, the oil pressure remained steadfast, holding perfectly steady. The hydraulic systems registered as nominal, and crucially, all control surfaces continued to respond with complete fidelity. Whatever had struck his fighter, while undeniably forceful, had not severed any essential systems or critical components. Nevertheless, the jarring impact served as an stark and undeniable reminder that his extraordinary fortune could not conceivably endure indefinitely. Each additional second he lingered precariously over this hostile airfield dramatically amplified the statistical probability that a Japanese gunner, through sheer chance, might land a decisive shell in a vulnerable spot that his Hellcat simply could not withstand. He discharged his final, desperate burst of ammunition at a nearby fuel truck position close to the runway, observing with grim satisfaction as it erupted in a spectacular inferno, before yanking the stick back hard and executing a sharp, decisive climb towards the perceived safety of the open ocean. His starboard guns, too, were now completely dry. All 2,400 rounds of his formidable ordnance had been expended, in a cumulative total of approximately 15 seconds of actual trigger engagement time, distributed across his 2 devastating passes. In his wake, the enemy airfield at Plu was succumbing to an agonizing demise. Stout, ascending steadily towards a more secure altitude, permitted himself a solitary glance rearward over his shoulder. The panorama of destruction that unfolded before him was almost surreal in its absolute totality. The entire northern segment of the installation had been utterly transformed into a raging inferno, a hellish landscape of fire and twisted metal. Gigantic columns of dense, black smoke billowed upwards, coalescing into a colossal, singular pillar that majestically ascended over 10,000 feet into the pristine tropical sky. The southern sector of the airfield, though initially spared the worst, presented a scarcely less dire tableau. Virtually every aircraft Stout had engaged during his meticulously executed second pass was now either actively burning or hopelessly disabled, their individual plumes of smoke contributing to the overwhelmingly apocalyptic vista. Even from a distance of 5 miles, the intense heat shimmer was distinctly discernible, causing the air above the scorched runway to ripple and distort like a desert mirage. On the ground, the beleaguered enemy crews had abandoned any futile pretense of extinguishing the widespread conflagrations, focusing instead on their own desperate survival, strategically keeping a wide berth from the ammunition that continued to detonate in unpredictable, staccato explosions. The profound tactical ramifications of his actions were nothing short of staggering, and as his combat-fueled adrenaline gradually subsided, Stout's immediate focus began to transition from personal survival to a comprehensive strategic assessment of the monumental impact he had wrought. A staggering total of 40 Japanese aircraft had been either utterly destroyed or critically rendered inoperable in approximately 8 intense minutes of aerial combat. This achievement transcended the definition of a mere successful strike. It represented nothing less than the absolute and complete eradication of Japanese air power within the crucial Plus sector. These very aircraft had constituted the core of the Japanese Navy's meticulously planned aerial response to the impending American invasion. Their elimination meant that the Japanese garrison on Plus was now effectively blind, stripped of its aerial reconnaissance capabilities, and left entirely defenseless against any future air assaults. The American Marines, scheduled to execute their landing operations on September 15th, a mere 3 days hence, would now enjoy unassailable and total air superiority from the precise moment their landing craft breached the surf and touched the designated beaches. The underlying arithmetic of this situation, while undeniably brutal, was remarkably straightforward. Each individual torpedo bomber among those destroyed possessed the potential to sink or severely cripple a vital transport ship. Furthermore, each of these transports was laden with roughly 500 Marines, in addition to their essential equipment and supplies. A coordinated aerial assault, even if executed by merely half of those 40 aircraft, could have inflicted catastrophic damage upon the invasion fleet, transforming the relatively shallow waters off Plus into a veritable maritime graveyard. Stout, through his singular, audacious initiative, had unequivocally averted that horrific nightmare scenario. The countless Marines who would soon bravely storm those contested beaches would remain utterly unaware of his name, oblivious to the fact that their unopposed, relatively safe landing had been made possible by one solitary pilot's audacious decision to assault an entire enemy air base alone. Yet, they would undoubtedly be alive because of his actions. This profound truth underscored the complex calculus of war, the invisible yet potent chains of cause and effect, where the seemingly isolated actions of an individual warrior could ripple outward, ultimately determining the salvation or the tragic doom of thousands. Beyond the immediate tactical triumph, a much broader strategic landscape had been irrevocably reshaped. Japanese commanders, dispersed across the entire Palau Islands archipelago, had been heavily reliant upon these very aircraft for both offensive strike missions and crucial defensive operations. Their sudden, complete absence now fundamentally altered the delicate balance of power throughout the entire theater. American aircraft carriers, previously constrained by the threat of enemy air power, could now deploy and operate significantly closer to the shore, thereby furnishing superior and more immediate close air support for ground troops. Reconnaissance flights could conduct their vital mapping of Japanese positions with impunity, entirely unhindered by opposing fighter aircraft. Furthermore, critical supply ships could execute their crucial runs to the nascent beachhead completely unburdened by the pervasive fear of hostile air attack. Indeed, one exceptionally successful strafing run had, in essence, fundamentally transformed the entire operational environment for the duration of the Plu campaign. Yet, Stout, possessing the clear-eyed realism characteristic of a seasoned combat veteran, harbored no illusions. He understood implicitly that Plu would still prove to be an unholy crucible for the Marines destined to land there. The formidable Japanese garrison, numbering approximately 11,000 hardened men, was deeply entrenched within the island's natural coral ridges and ingeniously fortified limestone caves, defensive strongholds that no measure of air superiority, however absolute, could entirely neutralize. The ensuing ground engagement, he knew, would be savage and protracted, fought relentlessly cave by cave and ridge by ridge, undoubtedly ranking among the bloodiest combat encounters in the annals of Pacific War history. His audacious attack had unquestionably eliminated one paramount threat, but it had not fundamentally altered the grim reality that Plu was an impregnable fortress that would ultimately demand a terrible, exorbitant cost in human lives. Nevertheless, every single Marine who managed to disembark from the landing beaches alive, spared from the deadly strafing runs of Japanese planes, represented a victory of immense, undeniable significance. The fuel gauge on his instrument panel registered a level considerably lower than Stout preferred, a direct consequence of the aggressive combat maneuvering and numerous high-speed passes that had consumed his precious reserves far more rapidly than initially anticipated. He meticulously aligned the Hellcat's nose towards the predetermined coordinates indicating the presumed location of the USS Hornet, then smoothly transitioned into a steady, efficient cruise climb. The discernible hole in his aircraft's tail section, though not immediately critical, was undeniably inducing a degree of minor aerodynamic drag, rendering the fighter marginally tail-heavy. However, this slight imbalance was well within his capacity to manage through precise trim adjustments. Suddenly, the radio channels burst into a flurry of urgent, agitated chatter. Other pilots from various flights were excitedly reporting the colossal column of smoke now dramatically ascending from Plu. Carrier controllers, their voices laced with a mixture of confusion and growing alarm, were urgently demanding immediate clarification regarding the unfolding events. Indeed, a palpable sense of disarray and apprehension was rapidly propagating throughout the entire fleet. With a quiet confidence, Stout activated his microphone and proceeded to deliver what was arguably the most profoundly understated after-action report of his distinguished career. "Hornet Control," he stated calmly. "This is Stout. Mission complete. Plu airfield neutralized. Returning to base." The radio waves fell into an astonished silence for several protracted seconds before the controller's voice finally returned, carefully modulated to maintain professionalism, but utterly unable to conceal his profound disbelief. "Say again your last, Stout," the controller requested. "Did you explicitly state neutralized?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on Stout's lips. "Affirmative," he confirmed succinctly. "The airfield is no longer operational. You'll undoubtedly want to dispatch a photo reconnaissance aircraft to acquire comprehensive documentation. Out." 40 minutes following his audacious solo mission, Stout's formidable Hellcat fighter alighted upon the USS Hornet's bustling flight deck, its tailhook engaging the critical No. 3 arresting wire with a violent lurch that propelled his body abruptly against the confining harness straps. Immediately, a cadre of vigilant deck crewmen converged upon the battle-scarred aircraft, their gazes widening in undisguised astonishment as they absorbed the extensive damage. The fighter's tail section was perforated with countless shrapnel holes, while viscous hydraulic fluid marred the fuselage in telltale streaks, and charred imprints adorned the wings, stark evidence of having traversed through the very explosions he had instigated. The plane captain, who ascended to assist Stout from the cramped cockpit, simply gazed in astonishment at the pilot, then at the conspicuously empty ammunition counters, before returning his bewildered stare to Stout. The entire flight deck appeared to hold its breath as news disseminated rapidly that the solitary aviator responsible for the gigantic plume of dark smoke, a phenomenon discernible across 50 miles of ocean, had indeed returned. By the moment Stout's boots finally met the unforgiving steel deck, an expectant throng had already coalesced around him. The exhaustive intelligence debriefing extended for a full 3 hours. Stout occupied a seat within the carrier's dedicated intelligence center, where an array of strategic maps lay unfurled over the expansive table. He systematically guided the assembled senior naval personnel through every meticulous detail of his audacious assault, his narrative powerfully corroborated by the concurrent reports from photo-reconnaissance aircraft, which unequivocally confirmed his preliminary damage assessments. Indeed, the aerial photographs conveyed the stark reality of the devastation with a clarity that surpassed mere verbal accounts. A staggering 40 enemy aircraft transformed into charred, skeletal remains. The airfield itself was visibly pockmarked with craters and emitting plumes of smoke, with residual fires still smoldering hours after the initial onslaught. The intelligence officers, their faces etched with a blend of fascination and skepticism, persisted in posing the same fundamental questions, albeit phrased in various ways, as if struggling to comprehend that a single pilot had achieved such a singular feat unassisted. "How many attack passes did you execute?" "Just 2, sir." "How much ammunition did you utilize?" "Every round." "Was your aircraft struck?" "Yes, but no incapacitating damage was sustained." "Did you have any accompanying wingmen?" "No, I operated alone." The relentless questioning ultimately ceased, succeeded by a profound silence that settled upon the room, a palpable atmosphere of awe mingled with utter incredulity. For his unparalleled actions during the Plume mission, the United States Navy subsequently bestowed upon Stout the esteemed Navy Cross, the service's second highest emblem of gallantry for valorous conduct. The accompanying citation partially stated, "For extraordinary heroism and distinguished service in aerial combat against enemy Japanese forces." However, this formal commendation was conferred several months thereafter, long after Stout had already executed dozens more perilous missions, and the protracted global conflict had inexorably progressed across numerous additional islands, through countless more amphibious invasions, and into a multitude of increasingly desperate engagements. He seldom spoke at length about the Plume operation with his fellow aviators, habitually parrying inquiries with humble gestures of dismissal and adroit conversational shifts. Within the prevailing ethos of the ready-room culture inherent to carrier aviation, an environment where personal pride often flared and pilots keenly vied to recount the most thrilling war stories, Stout's reserved demeanor was particularly conspicuous. He had undeniably achieved something truly exceptional, yet he seemed almost discomfited by the considerable attention his singular exploit garnered. Once the global conflict concluded in August 1945, Stout seamlessly reintegrated into civilian society. Embodying the same unassuming resolve that had so profoundly defined his tenure in uniform, he established roots in California, contributing his skills to the burgeoning aerospace industry during the period of rapid post-war expansion. There, He nurtured a household and cultivated an existence that outwardly appeared utterly unremarkable. He infrequently alluded to his wartime exploits, even in the company of his closest confidants. Consequently, his children matured into adulthood scarcely aware that their father had once been an exceptionally decorated Navy pilot. It was not until many decades subsequently, when dedicated military historians commenced the meticulous chronicle of the Pacific War's more obscure yet crucial engagements, that Stout's extraordinary plume mission began to garner the profound attention it rightfully merited. Astute researchers, sifting through archival materials such as after-action reports and the detailed carrier deck logs, uncovered the comprehensive records of his solo assault. They unequivocally acknowledged it as being among the most profoundly destructive single-pilot strikes ever recorded in the annals of aviation history. The profound impact of the mission upon established military methodologies was unobtrusive yet undeniably significant. Both Air Force and Navy tactical schools meticulously analyzed Stout's tactical execution as an exemplary case study in capitalizing on adversary miscalculations and in comprehending the ripple effects of strategic strikes. The fundamental tenet of targeting concentrated enemy resources to trigger sequential systemic breakdowns subsequently became a foundational element of contemporary ground assault doctrines. His inherent propensity for resolute action when presented with an ephemeral chance, even when operating beyond the strictures of his initial directives, evolved into a paradigm of the proactive leadership that modern militaries assiduously strive to instill within their commissioned personnel. Ultimately, the mission demonstrated unequivocally that under optimal conditions, a single pilot endowed with exceptional skill, unwavering courage, and a fortunate measure of serendipity could fundamentally alter the trajectory of a military engagement. Stout departed this life in 1989, having reached the age of 73, a lifespan that allowed him to witness the conclusion of the Cold War and observe the military tactics he had been instrumental in establishing evolve into entrenched military protocol. His eulogy, published in the local newspaper, acknowledged his Navy service, but allotted it merely a solitary paragraph, prioritizing accounts of his professional career and his family life. The mourners present at his final rites remained largely oblivious to the fact that the unassuming individual they had known had once obliterated a complete adversary air base in an intense 8-minute barrage of destructive force over an obscure Pacific atoll. Yet, the Marines who landed on Plu's treacherous beaches on September 15, 1944, and were consequently spared from being decimated by the expected onslaught of torpedo bombers and dive bombers, were indebted for their very existence to a singular choice made by one aviator. This decision was forged in the crucial moments preceding his initiation of his Hellcat's precipitous descent, as he unleashed his armaments upon 40 vulnerable, sitting targets. That is the enduring heritage that truly holds significance. It is a legacy quantified not by official commendations or ceremonial accolades, but by the multitudes of service members who safely returned home, because Robert Cowboy Stout resolutely concluded that certain opportunities materialize but a single time, and some perils are justifiably embraced.